friends. This is Jesse Juarez, president of the Rotary Club of sunny Seaside, California. You're watching a presentation which was recorded live at one of our club meetings. Seaside Rotary meets twice a month via Zoom. Our meetings feature dynamic presentations by many of the movers and shakers that make Monterey County such a vibrant and hardworking community. If you'd like to join a meeting or learn more about Rotary and the work that we do, you can reach out to Seaside Rotary Club at gmail.com. Again, that's Seaside Rotary Club at gmail.com. You can also connect with us on our Facebook page. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel for more dynamic content.
Wonderful. And now I'd like to give the floor to my colleague, Mr. Steve McShane, to introduce our esteemed guest speakers.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jesse. Today's subject is just so awesome because I spent my college career studying soil science and deeply involved in the subject matter before us. This planet we live on is finite, and so are the planet's resources. And as it relates to one of our most precious resources, soil, that is one component of our resource conservation district, of which we have two scientists that are in the field practicing to work with many stakeholders to protect that resource. I'll go through both speakers. We'll be first hearing from Emily Zafferman. She's done quite a bit of time in ecology. That's her PhD area of study. She's done work at UC Davis. Some of the things that I really find that I've been most impressive is her work when it comes to landowner education, watershed stewardship, natural native habitat restoration. There's quite a bit of challenge when it comes to invasive species, how we rethink how we do things when it comes to planning for conservation. It's an important interface with those in production agriculture or those that are in development to task them with how do we balance with our native and local environment. So Emily will be speaking, followed by Laura Murphy. She's a soil scientist with the Resource Conservation District. She got her soils degree and so did some studies at UC Davis. I'm also very impressed that she's had more than 10 years working with the Cooperative Extension out of Salinas. That's a very important space that has direct interface between the University of California and science with those in practicing agriculture, not to mention even programs like 4-H and even the Master Gardeners, of which I've been active in. She's also played a role in ALBA, which is an important incubator for farmers, where they incorporate natural resources and conservation practices into farming. I would like to say a laboratory for best practices when it comes to environmental integration into the practice of conventional agriculture. So healthy soil and a healthy environment alongside healthy human beings is a topic that I'm sure she will speak to. So the Resource Conservation District is with us today. We have two of their best and brightest, including an ecologist and a social scientist, a soil scientist. So please help me in giving a warm Rotary welcome to Emily Zafferman and Laura Murphy.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you all for inviting us to talk. I'll share my screen. So let's see, make sure this is gonna work out. All right. Hopefully everyone is seeing.
Yep, looks good, Emily.
All right. So today, the focus of my portion of this talk will be about the Monterey Regional Monarch Alliance, which is a relatively new group that Laura and I helped found for this region focused on monarch conservation. And then I'll talk about that. I'll talk first a little bit about just the RCD and what we do to give a little bit of background. And then Laura will be talking more specifically about her work in Seaside and some of the work that's going to be coming up for you all in the planting event on the 20th. So first, what is a resource conservation district? A lot of people get confused about who we are. We are a special district whose boundaries are defined by the state of California, similar to a water district or school district. But we are focused on conservation of land, water, soil, and other natural resources on private and public lands. We have a board of directors that's appointed by the county supervisors. And we are non-regulatory, so we're not the ones, making the rules and regs. We work collaboratively and voluntarily with private landowners and other landowners, agencies, organizations in the region, and focused on the county. So there's about 95, I believe, resource conservation districts throughout California. Our resource conservation district is pretty much the boundaries of Monterey County, and they often follow the county boundaries, but not always. So we've got a big county and big area, and we do a lot of different things. Our mission is to conserve and improve our natural resources, integrating the demand for environmental quality with the needs of agricultural and urban users. So I'm going to go through just a very brief list, try to do an overview of some of the things that we do at the RCD. We provide technical assistance and training for farmers on things like erosion control, nutrient management, water conservation. Laura is really involved in a lot of that work. We do large-scale watershed restoration projects, like the main project that I work on at the RCD is the Salinas River Arundel Donax removal project, which is a nasty invasive plant that's we're trying to get out of the river to restore the watershed. We have a colleague who's very involved in fire fuels management, so working on getting fuel breaks installed. There's a new prescribed burn association we're working with. We do projects related to species conservation, so we have a lot of projects related to steelhead passage up in the Carmel River, so we're removing barriers to steelhead migration. We do projects focused on pollinators, which is what we'll be focused on today. Also other amphibians like California red-legged frog and California tiger salamander. And we're involved in regional coordination of groups like the Integrated Regional Watershed Management Group and many other groups, also the Monterey Regional Monarch Alliance. So before I start talking about that group, I just want to give a quick plug. We have a website. If you're interested in finding out more about the RCD, you can go to rcdmonterey.org. You can sign up for our newsletter. And we're also on Facebook and Instagram. We post kind of project updates, things that we're working on, if you're interested in learning more. So back to the Monterey Regional Monarch Alliance. Why form an alliance around monarch conservation? Well, as most of you probably know, the Western monarch population is in severe decline. Last year, so 2021 winter, fewer than 2,000 total individual monarch butterflies were counted at all of the overwintering sites in California. That is less than 0.01% of the population size in the 1980s. And the little infographic on this slide shows you a comparison of, for every one monarch that was found last year, there would have been 2,250 monarchs back in the 1980s. So we've gone through a really significant population decline. Spoiler alert, good news, we have monarchs coming back to the overwintering sites. We'll have to wait and see what those numbers look like, but we do have better news this year than last year, so that's really nice to see, but they're still definitely in peril, and we need to work together to do something about it. And here in Monterey County, we're in a really important place for monarchs. So just quick 101 on monarch biology. Monarch butterflies overwinter here on the coast. All the sites are pretty close to the coast, within 5 miles of the coast, generally groves of cypress, eucalyptus, pine that have very specific habitat requirements in terms of temperature and wind and things like that. But monarchs come here to overwinter, and then around February they leave the overwintering sites to go migrate kind of generally in a northeasterly direction up into Oregon, Washington, other parts of California, and they breed on milkweed plants. So they lay their eggs on milkweed plants exclusively, just milkweeds. And what's really remarkable is that they do this migration back and forth between the overwintering sites over multiple generations. So the monarchs that are coming here right now to our overwintering sites have never been here before, and their parents have never been here before, and even their grandparents. It's probably about 4 generations where they migrate and breed along the way, and it's generation after generation that follows this migratory cycle, which is crazy and really cool. But what that means in Monterey County, we have these really important overwintering sites. We also have the breeding habitat inland. So we have different types of habitat that are important to monarchs here. So the origin of this alliance was that the California Association of RCDs, so you saw that map I put up before about all the different RCDs in California, got involved along with the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation and our specific RCD, wanting to just kind of find out, what's going on in this region, who is involved in monarch conservation, how can we work together? So we reached out to local organizations and agencies and had our first meeting in September of last year. And over the course of time, we've kind of come up with, well, who are we as a group? We're an association of independent organizations allied to collaborate, communicate, and reinforce all of our individual work towards conservation of the monarch butterfly. Move on. So some of the things that we're trying to do is create a network for sharing information and collaborating on projects so that we're not all out there reinventing the wheel. We're working together, leveraging each other's skills and abilities and what we have to offer. We want to increase and improve habitat in the county. We want to increase the availability of milkweed and nectar plants, develop outreach materials for the public and for nurseries, for folks who are working on monarch conservation projects on their own or in their groups, things like the Rotary Club. We are hoping to serve as kind of a one-stop shop for local information on monarchs. So people, all of our various member organizations sometimes get people asking questions about, hey, where do I find milkweed plants? Or how do I, what do I need to do to increase habitat? And so we want to function as like, this is the place to come for information if you want to help conserve monarchs in the county. And we're hoping to seek funding and partnerships and continue all this work. Here's just a list of some of the organizations that are involved. I'm not going to read them all now, but you can just see we have a wide variety from local agencies to larger nonprofit organizations, and we're all with the same goal of trying to help monarchs out. So we're right now holding quarterly meetings. We've created a memorandum of understanding, kind of define who we are and what we do. We're working on an action plan. We actually just had our quarterly meeting right before this meeting. So we're fresh from that, talking about some of the things we're going to do, like develop a website and generating outreach materials and things that we're going to try to accomplish. So hopefully you all will be roped in terms of the work that you might do as a club, and hopefully you can come to us to get some good information. And so, as I said, yeah, there's still hope for the monarchs. Right now, the current count at the Pacific Grove Monarch Sanctuary, which is kind of our big famous monarch sanctuary, is over 13,000 monarchs. So again, going from zero, there were 0 monarchs last year at the PG Monarch Sanctuary. So there is still hope. Insect populations can be really bouncy, jump up and down over time. This doesn't mean that everything's okay, but it does mean there's hope. So that's a beautiful sign, and we're we're hoping to kind of use that energy and momentum to get more done. So I will turn it over now to Laura, and I'll be switching the slides. So Laura, just let me know when to flip the slides.
Hey, thank you so much, Emily. I appreciate that. So hi, everyone. I'm Laura Murphy. I am a soil scientist at the Resource Conservation District of Monterey County. And in addition to that, I am a member of the Environmental Commission at the City of Seaside. And so my portion of this presentation is a little bit about how those two roles are married to produce what is my involvement in pollinator habitat expansion in the City of Seaside more than anything. Next slide, please. So starting out, first, a little glimpse of my day job, what my life is like at the RCD from day to day. It's already been alluded to, as Emily said, I do a lot of technical assistance and direct outreach with farmers. I support farmers to access professional resources related to the conservation practices they might want to implement on their farms, to obtain grant funding in order to implement those practices. I also help them to participate in research trials, evaluating new practices, and using existing technology to improve the efficiency of their resource use. So these are just some images from different projects that I might be involved in on any given day. Next slide. Some of the areas of focus for the RCD's priorities for natural resource management, outreach, and education, which is essentially what I'm doing, are related to water quality management and conservation. And that's probably what I spend the majority of my time doing, providing distribution uniformity evaluations for irrigation systems and helping farmers to improve their irrigation use efficiency. Next slide. Another area of focus, there's a bit of a lag on the slides for me, is focused on soil stability and health. And so I might spend time with farmers assessing soil-borne disease pressure or abiotic stress conditions related to their soil management practices. And so soil stability and health, of course, is where my background primarily is with my soil science degree. So I spend quite a bit of time on that as well. Next slide. And another area of focus that I work on quite extensively is enhancing ecosystem services to improve agricultural outcomes. So that's what we might refer to as integrated pest management in many cases, trying to bring in beneficial insects and pollinators, of course, as well, to improve conditions on the farm. So that might involve establishing native plant hedgerows around the perimeters of a production block, or growing a multi-species cover crop and allowing that to bloom for early season populations of pollinators and beneficial insects to develop within the farm, and practices of that nature. So I work in all of these areas in my day job. And so there is a connection to the Monterey Regional Monarch Alliance and my actual day job work. Next slide, please. But it also connects to a project that I'm involved in right here in Seaside, which is the establishment and maintenance of pollinator gardens. So this is what I refer to as my nights and weekends hat here, my role on the Environmental Commission. And as a resident of Seaside, I feel compelled to contribute to and participate within this community. And so since March of 2018, I have volunteered as a member of the Environmental Commission. And through that, we encourage the city to adopt a resolution to become recognized and certified as a Bee City USA. And part of that commitment really requires us to engage in public outreach and education and habitat creation. So because of the intersection of these personal and professional commitments, I've observed the value of Seaside as a location to provide this nectar-producing habitat for the Western monarch butterfly, and the value of that habitat to also support other native pollinators and invertebrates, including ground nesting bees, like bumblebees. And then in addition to that, the value of those gardens to enhance the human community's experience of our public spaces, which are improved by the effort. So they're improved by this effort because of the ecosystem services that habitat provides, but also the simple beauty of it. They provide a living learning laboratory. Many of these parks are close to schools. They provide an opportunity for camaraderie, fresh air, and exercise. We at the Environmental Commission meeting last night, incidentally, had a presentation from the Blue Zones Project, who I know also provided a presentation to the Seaside Rotary pretty recently. And it kind of just checked all the boxes in terms of that sense of gathering together, doing a healthy, safe activity outdoors. And then one other thing is that many of these native plants also provide medicinal and culinary uses. And this list can go on and on. Next slide, please. So giving you a rough timeline of what has happened in this initiative, starting in April of 2019 is when the City Council adopted the resolution to become a Bee City USA. And in November of 2019, we secured as a commission 1,600 pollinator plants from the Xerces Society. And so then starting that December, there was a huge undertaking to pot those up. They were tiny plugs. We potted them up into 1 gallon size containers. And this was really the beginning of a coalition of community groups, different nonprofit organizations, together with some city commissions to kind of create what would ultimately result in what is now ongoing. So I'll continue. Throughout 2020, it was really individual stewards or small groups of people that would organize and establish these pollinator plants and then maintain those habitats that were planted. And then in April of this year, the Friends of Seaside Parks Association began to host a Saturday volunteer community work day in a regular rotation at 9 different parks that all have pollinator habitat. So that has been happening every Saturday since April, the first week of April of this year. And it's going strong. So you can see a list here of the Seaside pollinator gardens that are established and currently in process at public parks, and a quick, very short list of some of the major partners that are involved. So as I mentioned, FOSPA is really taking the lead on coordinating and maintaining that a steward will be present for people to come and meet and gather around a park every Saturday. Sustainable Seaside is another group that has really taken a very key role in establishing these habitats and helping to make those work days move forward. Also the City of Seaside, including the council and mayor, of course, both by supporting the Bee City resolution and providing some line item funds that are relevant to the project, also being present, showing up and helping out on work days. The Department of Public Works and other city staff have also contributed. And then of course, the Environmental Commission and the Parks and Recreation Commission have been very important in this effort. Next slide. So just some quick before and after pictures to give you a general sense of just how incredible these plants are in these gardens. These are all from the same park. This is Capra Park, and it was just an empty sand lot, basically, a little bit of annual weeds, kind of grasses, a pretty neglected spot. And this was one of the last gardens that we planted. This didn't get planted until last summer, summer of 2020, excuse me, and it grew quite lush. This was actually stewarded on volunteer time by a member of the city staff, and I just couldn't be more proud. I hope you can appreciate the difference from before and after. Next slide. We've gotten some good press, and we did have an outreach event, a park tour back in early October, so that we invited members of the public to come out and see all of the gardens and learn more about it. And the Monterey County Weekly did some profiles on the effort as well. Next slide. We do have a resource page, which I'll share later, where you can find more information about establishing gardens. These are just some workday photos and showing you again some of those pollinator gardens that we have established in the parks. These beautiful flowering plants on the left are at Lincoln Cunningham Park. Next slide. So here you can see our park workday calendar. If you are interested in supporting pollinators in Seaside, if you want to contribute to the effort to create habitat, nectaring habitat that's appropriate for the monarch butterfly, this is your opportunity every single Saturday from 10 a.m. to noon. We are rotating each week through these 9 parks, and we so far have scheduled out the calendar through the first week of April. And this will be updated, and you can find that updated calendar as time goes by on the City of Seaside's Bee City USA website. And then this is that link, as I mentioned before, about the resources we have available for establishing and maintaining pollinator gardens. If you might be interested in doing this in another location, perhaps your own home garden, there are a lot of really useful resources shared at that link. Next slide. So then I really want to link this all back again to what Jesse mentioned in the beginning, this upcoming planting day on November 20th for the all Monterey County Laguna Seca pollinator habitat planting. And so a couple key points from the time that Emily and I have spent with all of our partners in the Monarch Alliance, things that we've learned that are very important to keep in mind, including that there should be no milkweed planted in Seaside in general within 5 to 10 miles of the coast throughout California, particularly for our area. At Laguna Seca and other inland locations, native milkweed is a great idea. And we should always be trying to avoid tropical or perennial non-native milkweeds. And for ground nesting bees, try not to mulch everything. It's very important to leave some bare soil so that those bees can access their nesting habitat. And maintenance. So I've just told you about our regular every Saturday workday. There's definitely a reason for that. It's just an incredible amount of work, and you have to be consistent coming back to a newly established pollinator garden. So although native plants are very well adapted to local conditions, the sites where these gardens are being established are typically highly disturbed areas, and it just takes additional care to ensure that that habitat has a fair chance to get established. So here's a couple guidelines as far as irrigation. You want to start with a really deep watering and then have frequent watering in the first month or so if it's hot and dry, to make sure you keep those really shallow roots moist. And then you start to taper off to less frequent and deeper watering. And it's all going to be site specific, but this will last at least throughout the first year after planting. And then depending on how drought conditions develop or don't, you'll need to irrigate through the first 2 to 3 summers to really make sure that habitat's established. And then after that, yeah, you can tend to walk away from it, depending on how much you want to keep fresh growth and blooms. The more that you want of that, the more you want to continue with some kind of a maintenance watering schedule, but that might only be once or twice a summer. And the other thing is weed control. You absolutely have to be thinking about weed control because they find a way. And so especially pernicious weeds like oxalis and some of the grasses, the spreading grasses that we see particularly in Seaside, a very consistent effort is going to be easier and more effective than having just a one-off big event where you clear all of the weeds after they've grown really large and potentially spread more seed. Using mulch is a good idea, always natural materials like wood chips, but as I said before, don't forget to leave a little bit of bare soil in the area for ground nesting bees to be able to access habitat. And so I would say ideally on weed control and maintenance in general, when you plant a pollinator garden, you want to have an individual or a small group that's checking and weeding 2 to 5 times per month in the first couple of years, ideally. So somebody who really takes, an interest in maintaining that garden and making sure that it's coming along. And if you see things getting out of control, then, rally the troops and call the rest of the club in to come and have a big work day. Next slide. And then I just ended with a few, inspiring quotes from some resources that that kind of guide my view of life and work and relationship to the world. Here, I will just allow you to read those if you're interested, and I recommend these resources for follow-up if any of this speaks to you. And that's it from me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Laura and Emily. It's clear from this presentation It's not just the work that you two do individually, but the partnerships that your organization has with all these various groups and organizations throughout Monterey County. It really moves mountains, and it's wonderful to see just what kind of effect it has on this community. So thank you two for all the work that you're doing there. Looks like we have some questions here in the chat box window. I'm going to try to read them off in the order that they were written. Oh, this first one, this is actually something that I've always been a little curious about. How does one go about counting butterflies accurately?
Oh man, I'm sure that that's hard. I know. So in our meeting just that we had with the Alliance just a little bit ago, we talked about the butterfly counts in for the Thanksgiving counts. So there's this thing called Thanksgiving counts, which happens at all the overwintering sites every year. And there's specific training that goes along with it. I haven't been through it, but right now there's a process of training volunteers for how to do it. And I think that so in the overwintering groves, the monarchs all kind of cluster. They form these like clusters together, and there's ways of estimating. I think there's ways of kind of breaking it up into like chunks of a certain number, where you kind of know like this size chunk is a certain number of monarch butterflies. But it seems challenging to me. I've never tried to do it, but that's all I know about that. I know there's opportunities for volunteers through the Pacific River Museum of Natural History to be trained and to become a monarch counter if anybody is interested in that.
Well, very happy to hear that the uptick of the butterfly population, the counts this year. As you said, that there's still hope. So very, very happy to hear about that. This next question, Emily, you mentioned your work on invasive species. It's an important topic. How do you weigh the cost benefit between education and possible environmental impact of eradication measures?
Eradication of possible. Yeah, so there is eradication of invasive species. There's often collateral damage. There's often, they can be, the methods used can impact other species. But yeah, we kind of look at the overall picture and the end game, like what is the end state that we're looking at. So for example, my work on the Salinas River, which is where I spend most of my time, is with this Arundo donax, this like bamboo like plant that we're trying to eradicate from the river. And so the ultimate end state that we want to see is a more native habitat that supports wildlife, native plants, as well as native animals, kind of restoring the general hydrology of the system. And in order to do that, we have to get rid of the invasive plants. So it's unfortunate that we have to do it, but it's just, there's no real alternative if we want to get the system back to a more natural state. So we try to do minimization measures. So just for example, like we have biological monitors working with the contractors that are out doing the invasive plant control at all times, so that if there's any species of concern, they can stop work and make sure that we're not impacting any special status species. There's surveys that are done beforehand to mark any sensitive habitats like wetlands, so we're not driving through and causing damage. And then we use practices to try to minimize damage as much as possible to the surrounding vegetation that is native.
Well, it's definitely an important job that in order to sustain our ecosystem and what's native to our community. This next question is actually from myself. We've had a particularly warm year. How has this affected soil health in the county?
So I can't say that I am aware of any trends that have been pointed to specifically about soil-borne diseases being affected by warm temperatures. Oftentimes we will see more insect-borne disease pressure with warmer temperatures. That's very common as far as the agricultural crops. But for soil health, warm temperatures tend to mean more rapid mineralization of nutrients, basically more soil microbial activity in the soil. And so that can kind of change the scheduling on fertility, especially for organic farmers that are relying on that process. But I'm not aware of any specific trends related to soil health, relating soil health to warmer temperatures, aside from the fact that, of course, as temperatures are warmer and we have less moisture available, that drives moisture out of the soil, which reduces that type of microbial activity. So if there's not irrigation present, or if there are restrictions on the quality of the irrigation water because of that, then that can start to affect soil health.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for that. Our next question we have here, what role can individual homeowners do to help monarchs in the area? What about invasive species?
That's a great question. I see the next ones are more geared towards Laura, so maybe I'll take a stab at this one and Laura can fill in. Something that Laura mentioned, which is sometimes counterintuitive to people, is that milkweed is actually not supposed to be planted within 5 miles of the coast. And the reason for this is that we have these overwintering sites on the coast, and so when monarchs and their biology, when they come to the coast for the winter, they're kind of getting ready to shut down a little bit. They go into this kind of diapause. And when they encounter milkweed, it can trigger them to start breeding. So they think milkweed and they think, okay, time to breed, time to lay eggs. And really what we want them to do when they're coming to our region is just hunker down. So that's one of the things with tropical milkweed. Tropical milkweed is pretty easy to grow, and it's sold by a lot of nurseries, and it's beautiful. And unfortunately, it does not go dormant in the winter like some of our native milkweeds. So the tropical milkweed will be present when monarchs are coming to this region. Monarchs will see the milkweed and say, okay, hey, time to breed, instead of time to go into overwintering phase. So one thing that you can do is not plant milkweed. If you're within 5 miles of the coast, don't plant milkweed. It's not the appropriate place for milkweed. If you're farther away from 5 miles, then you can plant milkweed. That's a great thing to do, because once the monarchs start to migrate away, they'll need milkweed for breeding further inland. But planting nectar plants, so plants that are flowering around the times that monarchs are in the region, which is they start coming around November and start leaving around February. So planting plants that are flowering at that time is a great thing to do, because the monarchs do need to fuel up before they go into the overwintering grounds, and when they're leaving, they're pretty hungry. So so it's important to have those native nectar resources available, and that's also important for lots of other pollinators. Another thing that you can do is minimize pesticide use, especially insecticide use, because that can harm not just the nasty insects that you don't want eating your plants, but they can harm the native insects, monarchs, and other plants, or other things like bees. So insecticides is one of the things that's implicated as a big factor in the decline of monarchs. So doing hand weeding and things is better than or trying to maintain your native plant garden without chemicals is ideal.
Well,
did I miss anything, Laura?
I feel like we could go on for a long time, but no, those are some very good points.
Well, thank you for that information. Definitely good for the average homeowner to know. It is 12:49. I think we can squeeze in one more question. Looking at the next one, could lead to it's a bit of a larger question. But Laura, can you tell us more about the Environmental Commission in Seaside? Tell us more about the successes and priorities.
Oh, well, I've told you about a major success, which has been the collaborative initiative on expanding pollinator habitat. The commission does, of course, have additional projects and priorities, and one of those is the plastics ordinance, which we are just about to launch major educational outreach about, and that seeks to limit plastic pollution through prohibiting single-use disposable plastics, particularly the type that you would see in takeaway containers, right, from restaurants. And so that's a major initiative that we'll be starting to roll out in the coming year. And otherwise, we just had a meeting yesterday. I should be able to go on and on about it, but I focus so much being on the habitat subcommittee. I focus so much on the habitat component of our priorities that always dominates my thoughts. But our commission meetings are on the second Tuesday evening of every month, and I certainly invite you to sit in. We also have them, of course, posted. The city live streams them. They're on the city's YouTube page, so you can always go back and reference those.
Very wonderful. Well, I think we'll have to wrap up the Q&A session there, but Laura and Emily, thank you so much for all of this information. The Seaside Rotary Club applauds all the work that you two are doing, working with all these different organizations and really helping to secure the habitat restoration for our beautiful Monterey County. So thank you two for all your hard work.
Thank you for having us, Jesse.
Thank you. Great to be here.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording function now.